This is the Cardiff Business School podcast, where we explore the power of public value in everything that we do. My name is Peter Wells, and I am the Pro Dean of Public Value here in Cardiff Business School. Today, my guest is Dr. Zoe Lee. Zoe is a reader in marketing and an expert in brand and sustainability, and we'll be exploring those issues with her today. Zoe, welcome.
And thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you. And your work is very much focused in the world of marketing, but around this idea of kind of ethical branding. How long have you been interested in this area of research? Has it always been a stream of work for you, or is it a more recent development?
Yeah, it's not like I started to say, wow, I would like to work on or look at responsible branding. So my early kind of research where I first started is that I started with looking at branding in the non-profit sectors.
Okay.
So I look at how charities use their brands to attract more donors or to get certain funders or to generate awareness about certain issues. And in that particular project, when I first started, I started to realize actually there's a lot of discussions around how even charities are becoming more commercialized. But at the same time, the world's really changing, right? How businesses is also talking about purpose and talking about being good. So that's how I kind of like then shifted a little bit and look at, okay, if that's the case, how does business do good today? You know, how do they actually create an ethical branding and do consumer buys it? So that's a kind of my kind of journey from, you know, looking at branding in the charity sectors to the businesses side.
Oh, that makes some sense.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that works as a storyline.
Yeah.
And taking that more, shall we say, holistic look at the branding, perhaps someone who's not immersed in the world of marketing would need to understand this a bit more clearly. How does the branding of a product or the branding of a business relate explicitly to its substance, to the reality of how that business creates products and services and delivers them?
Yeah. So if you look at the consumer level, right, we typically buy and choose brands because it reflects our own identity or it aligns with our values. Mm-hmm. So similarly, business today will have to think about what this their brand stands for, because it's not just about attracting the right talent to work for the companies, but it's also from the consumer and wider stakeholder perspective. You know, they need to get the right people, the right customers to kind of align themselves with the company's values. So brands or companies' values are absolutely important when we think about ethical branding.
One thing that's puzzled me, and it's not actually part of your research, so it's not really a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, what about non-consumers? So say you've got a brand that actively is discouraging some consumers from participating with that brand. We never pick that up in research, do we? They're invisible.
Yeah, I think that's a very tricky question.
Yeah.
I've never seen, well, maybe one good example would be the story around Patagonia.
Oh, okay.
You know, Patagonia, as you know, is a really good company because they try to be sustainable, but at the same time, they run it as a business. Mm-hmm. But if you look at their quite kind of high profile campaign, you know, they do run something like "Don't buy this jacket" during the Black Friday. Yeah. So they are trying to actively discourage consumers to buy the jacket, even though they know there's a lot of sales going on that particular day. But it's also getting people to change their mindset. Do they need this jacket? You know, the old jacket's still usable. Mm-hmm. So I think there are some companies who are doing that, but I don't think many companies is engaging in that kind of strategy.
Interesting. And so you've looked at, obviously some very well-known brands, good examples of the kind of work and things you're interested in. One I wanted to pursue with you is Body Shop. So you've got a fabulous article in the Conversation, which has garnered a lot of reads. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been really interesting. I think I went to the original Body Shop in Brighton.
Yeah.
In what they call the Lanes part of Brighton, when it was the first outlet. And from that point, which was tragically rather a long time ago, but from that point, it really grew and grew and grew.
Yeah, sure.
What happened to that brand? It spoke to that idea of activism. It spoke to key themes like not tested on animals, recycling the containers and the products.
Yeah.
What went wrong?
I think where do we start? I think there are too many issues that's happening that's facing the body shop. It's not just one key thing. But I think if you ask the public, what do they associate the body shop with? Most people will associate the body shop as, Anita Roddick, as, the founder, the activist, and also this idea of no testing on animals. But even though the Body Shop has such great brands at that time, things has really moved on because competitors catch up. If you think about today, not testing on animal become perhaps the norm for a lot of other beauty brands that is clean. If you think about Lush and Aesop, all these new competitors are also, joining this kind of movement. So I think one of the main things that we highlight in the article is that perhaps there's lack of true transformation from the body shop perspective, because since the founder has passed, I think, they've been bought by different companies and different larger companies, and they haven't really invested in what is the real meaning of the values of the body shops. And that over time, consumer get tired of the same old things.
Right.
So I think you have to, building an ethical brand is not just looking inside, but it's also try to align with the consumer expectation, which is, I think this is a really interesting time to look at, how companies and brands engaging in ethical conversations or engaging in socio-political issues, because that is something that is expected from the consumers. If you think about Generation Z particularly, more than half of them would support companies or brands that are willing to take a stand on any social or environmental issues. And that's quite an interesting thing. So going forward, I think brands has to be, keep checking in terms of their value, whether it aligns with the external or the emerging customer's value, and then adapt as they go on. So I think that's a key thing. I think, Body Shop is a great brand, still is today. Yeah.
Interesting. So you have brands aligning with these social values, and that's obviously, where your research is located, and it clearly resonates with public value themes and the kind of wider mission of the school. But then there's a little bit in me thinks, well, what about the reverse happening? So you've got companies like Twitter, X, taken over by Elon Musk with a very different set of values and agendas. Yes, they lost a lot of people, but then that's still ongoing. Are there kind of instances of the opposite, so to speak, of the kind of branding that you're looking at? And would your research ever take you into that territory?
Not directly, because I think what you're saying that is perhaps merger and acquisitions where really good types of ethical brands being bought by another companies. And we see that a lot in the business world today. Typically, startup company are very good in building a good brands because, they start from scratch, and typically the founders' value are very much kind of guiding through the business philosophy, if you like. And once these brands grow and grow, ultimately they get attention from the bigger companies and bigger businesses, and they want to buy these companies. But what happened after that is that typically it really depends on how this company who bought this smaller cloud company, how do they manage their brands?
Right.
A lot of times perhaps the value can be diluted, but it doesn't mean that they're going to always be in trouble. A good example is Ben & Jerry.
Yeah.
So I think recently...
I think I used Divine as my example, but...
I think Ben & Jerry is those brands that lots of people admire because they are, from day one, they are very much about, these kind of social equalities, and they are not afraid to shout out about it. But recently there is a court case, isn't it, how Ben & Jerry is suing Unilever on the other hand. So it's interesting to see that, because I think sometimes the brand needs to be a little bit braver to take a stand and not just being worried about losing the customers.
Right.
There's a really interesting a report that's published recently that talks about if a brand wants to be ethically good or be a purposeful brand, there need to be a cost associated with it. I think that's a really interesting thing.
That's an interesting line of argument, yes.
That means the company will have to be...
so it's not a free journey.
It's not a free journey. They will have to be okay by taking a loss in terms of profit and okay in, losing certain types of or certain groups of customers because they don't align with them anymore.
Yeah.
And so this idea is really interesting and challenging a lot of brands that's out there try to be purposeful. Are they really purposeful if there's no trade-off and there's no sacrifice involved?
Yeah.
So I think that is a really interesting idea that I came across recently.
That is interesting. And I suppose for me at least, one of the other kind of dimensions of this is transparency. And, I'm thinking about, say, Oatly, who have their webpage with all their disasters on and all the things that they think they've done wrong. And they try to explain why they did what they did and sometimes why they've changed because of the feedback.
Yeah.
And do you see that as being an important part of the kind of an ethical brand stance, or is that a sort of just a more elaborate form of greenwashing?
Yeah, I think in this space, I mean, greenwashing has been talked a lot. And I think any companies who is trying to be good need to be aware of elements of greenwashing, whether they like it or not. And transparency is a key thing, I think, for company to think about, how can they be transparent in order to maintain their authenticity, because authenticity is not just built in one day. It takes time to build an authentic brand. And when we think about being transparent, it can be through different types of reporting. It can be through different actions. Sometimes in my research, when we go and ask consumers, especially when we ask consumers about these particular brands, whether they are inclusive or they are not, a lot of times consumer will ask me and say, I want to see evidence. So not just a company being transparent in terms of what they have done, but also the company, the customers somehow and say, I want to know exactly how they are dealing with the social equality issues, or if they're talking about environmental, how they're actually saving the planet. So interestingly, transparency is just one route in terms of building that authenticity. And I think company today need to figure out multiple ways and pathway to think about how they continue to be top of the mind among the consumers when they think about good brands or ethical brands. The other piece that we have been doing recently, which is looking at storytelling.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, how do we be authentic? Because it's not just about portraying. So this is a context where we look at luxury brands using disabled models in their brand campaigns. So even though that is it received a really positive publicity in the media.
And shows their inclusiveness.
Because if you think about it, luxury sense, typically we think about exclusivity rather than inclusivity. And however, when we ask and do the survey, when we ask consumer, do you think these luxury fashion brands, really inclusive by featuring disabled model in their brand campaign? We found that there's an interesting negative effects. Consumers just don't really buy it.
They think it's not substantive enough?
Not substantive enough, or perhaps, consumers are quite skeptical.
Right.
However, what we found in our research is that through storytelling, by really weaving in the stories of these disabled models, how they overcome barriers, how they their inspiration stories, actually makes consumer much more happier and perhaps more believable into that campaign. And that increases that credibility of the advertising and that increases their willingness to buy more from these fashion brands. So storytelling, I think, is another really kind of important facets of these ethical brands to try to be authentic.
Right.
Yeah.
Which obviously implies they have to work a lot more hard. They have to put more effort into this. They can't just take a couple of pictures and say, that's us, we're doing it.
Yeah. So it's really not just about visual representation. So it's not just about aesthetically and then say, look at me, I have featured certain facets of diversity in my brand campaign, but actually moving beyond that. Our research also shows that, other ways a company can do that is by partnering with charities in a similar space, involving local communities, as long as it links to the values and, the cause that they are championing. So, so it's not just a visual representation. I think that's the main mistake.
That is an interesting one, though, because I think, when you're linking with those sort of NGOs, charities and sort of activist groups and so on, there's always a risk for those groups to partner with a company. because the business may not be as they assumed, and
True.
They could be, in a sense, kind of polluted by the business with which they partner.
Yeah.
So it's not always an easy marriage either way, I suspect.
No, I think then due diligence has to be done, and there need to be, they need to find a way to have a win-win situation because consumer can see through it.
Sure.
So if a big corporation wants to partner with a charity just for the sake of that particular cause, consumer can see through it. So I think no matter what, I think it's always great to demonstrate impact. So companies who are really championing, let's say, inclusivity, do they really engage with certain minority groups or marginalized groups beyond just their brand campaigns? So they have to weave these stories into their campaigns. So it's not just about that particular September issues of the particular brands.
Yes, nicely put. So, I see this in your research world, and we can feel the energy and enthusiasm you have for that.
Yeah.
Does it translate into your teaching, or is the teaching always kind of more mainstream? Or are you able to bring this to the students?
I mean, of course, a lot of the research that we've done is also, I try to use this kind of two-way system. So it's not just bringing research to the classroom, but also using classroom as a way to kind of come up with new research questions.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
So
you might as well whilst you're there.
Yeah, because I think as educator, one of the joy that when we do teaching is to see the students learning. Mm-hmm. As an academic, we spend a lot of time doing research, and a lot of time could be quite hidden. Mm-hmm. No one really knows about your project until it's being published or it's being shown like in a conversation piece. But actually, when you start to translate those research into the classroom settings, hopefully you will inspire your students to really think about this topic, particularly when we talk about activism in class, when we talk about social sustainabilities, we talk about environmental issues and climate justice, inclusivity. Students are typically like really interested in those questions. And hopefully during this discussion in class, the student can come up with their own new questions that then causes me to really think about my own research. And does it really align?
That's interesting, yeah.
So because they are the new generations.
Sure.
And the way they think about this issue may not be what I think about these issues. I love in terms of bringing my research into classroom and someone to test the idea. So that's a kind of one thing that I do from time to time. When I have this new idea, I will test it out in my classroom and say, look, what do you guys think about this?
And of course, as you say, it's really valuable feedback straight away, but also that source of innovation. Potentially really significant, which makes me wonder a little bit. And again, this is probably another unfair question, but given that you're so capable of answering, I'm going to ask anyway.
Okay.
How do you feel about the branding of the university?
Oh.
Now, bear in mind, you hope to have a long and fruitful career. No, seriously, it's an important question, I think, nowadays. I think in the past, universities didn't have to think much about branding in a general sense.
Yes, true.
And for us, Russell Group University and for many other well-established universities, there was a kind of clarity to what we did, and we didn't need to communicate that much beyond, we do these courses and blah, blah, blah. Now, my feeling is it's different.
Yeah.
So where are we in terms of branding and the university?
Just a disclaimer, I didn't do research on terms of branding in higher education.
Of course, that's why I'm saying it's a totally unfair question.
Yeah, but I think this is a really interesting question because, today we, are facing a really different types of crisis, I would say, or perhaps a different environmental situations. As you mentioned, quite rightly so, for a long time, universities are quite complacent in terms of we just based on our heritage and because of our locations, there will be some students, international students, who want to come in to study in our university. But the whole world is changing. A lot of emerging countries have developed their own universities that is much more advanced and much more perhaps contemporary, and a lot of political issues as well that's kind of, changing the whole climates. So I think in terms of my personal view about UK university, in terms of how they brand themselves, I think there's a lot of work to be done. And it also means that it's really exciting time for university to rethink about their purpose, to really read things about what do they stand for. And so if you think about it, Cardiff Business School is really good in terms of branding themselves as a public value
Indeed, and this is
school.
the underlying purpose of my question.
Exactly.
Because I'm thinking to myself, we have that clear message, and we've been pretty consistent in delivering the reality of that in our teaching and research and so on. But what I'm not sure about is whether we're delivering that as a message and a brand to the outside world.
Yes. And before I answer that question, I think it's also important to look at a lot of other universities also adopting similar approach. So, in the branding kind of fundamental, we talked about the sameness.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of positioning, we talked about you need to take a stand on certain things and do it well.
Right.
So that means you have to look at your own capability. Mm-hmm. Each university, even though they talk about public value or civic value or being good, because some business schools call themselves being good business school, or conscientiousness, I think we really need to look inside and think about what is our own capacity, really.
Right.
What we're doing well and how can we continue leveraging that? Because that is probably an easy win for the university in terms of the branding, but they need to also consistency is important. Mm-hmm. So I think the fact that we're doing it is great, but we can do a lot more, maybe engaging different stakeholders. So I think in terms of, the branding again, the kind of fundamental consistency is important. We can do many things, but stay on message. I think that's the main thing that I also tell my students, like when you build a brand, you can innovate, but you need to be consistent in terms of your messaging and in terms of who you are.
Because you have just talked yourself into a job here, you realise. So, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's an important thing. And for us, we feel that the public value message is perhaps a bit more distinctive than you think it is, but that's a matter for us to debate. But that it does come from the kind of ground up.
Yeah.
And then it gets embodied in skills and research interests. In your case is a classic example, looking at the kind of sustainability and ethical issues around branding is very distinctive and aligned to our public value mission. But perhaps what we're not doing yet is explaining that to those potential consumers out there in that very messy marketplace that you've just described.
Yeah.
Of course, the podcast is partly doing this job.
True.
Here we are, ironically, trying to do a bit of that marketing. But do you have any notion of what we might do next or what we might do better?
I think in terms of, before we even answer the questions, I think the other questions that we perhaps need to think about is the target audience. Mm-hmm. Who do we want to reach to? Because what we do, we have to speak to this particular audience. And every audience requires a slightly different way of communicating or perhaps different types of content.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even this discussion is not suited to everybody. This is clear.
So, for example, this may not be suited for students per se, I think. So we really need to think about mapping out who our key audience that would think, will work very well within the public value messaging, or how would that look like? Mm-hmm. Because, we can all start with public value, but the way we talk about it and the way we translate it into different audience could be very different. From the student perspective, it would be very different because they were looking at employability, for example. Mm-hmm. Local businesses would be looking at the public value messaging differently. The same thing with, internationally. Yes. So international stakeholders. So it's not just a local, but it's also international partners. Yes, how would they look at public value? So I think all this exercise will be really key to building out the foundations in terms of what, public value could mean for all these different audience. I think
that's a really important point, because I think what we've been good at is thinking about what it means for us.
Yeah.
What we've not been so good at is what it means for everybody else.
Yeah, I think in my previous work around rebranding, we talked a lot about tone of voice. Mm-hmm. So, everybody knows the meaning of perhaps public value, but how we communicate that, in certain audience, let's say maybe influencing public policy, we have to be more aggressive perhaps or more confident, where when we talk to potential students, maybe we have a much more hopeful and more inspiring stories, tone of voice to engage with them. So it's kind of whole spectrum, and figuring that out can be a really important piece. I think will be valuable to kind of bring this idea of public value to the next level.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I'd given you a lot of work to do. You might just have given me quite a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope it's really useful and enjoyable.
Yes. Well, thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Peter.
It's been a really interesting discussion. I knew it would be, and it has been. There's lots for me personally to go away and think about. I hope there's lots for our audience to think about.
Yeah.
And clearly you have an enormous research agenda ahead of you in so many ways. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. This has been the Cardiff Business School podcast, where we explore the utility and value of our public value mission. Today we've been talking with Dr. Zoe Lee about branding, brand equity, the meaning of branding in a very turbulent world, and particularly around issues around ethics and sustainability. I think Zoe's on a journey that's going to go on and on. She's got a lot of work ahead of her. She's suggested to me that I've got a lot of work ahead of me as well, as we try to reach out and explain our public value messaging to the wider world. Thank you very much.